Welcome back to the FlurrySports Podcast. I'm Zach Bruner. Jake Osmond's with me. We're going to start the show with this. We record during Monday Night Football, as we always do.
Oh, my God.
And literally, the whole Damar Hamlin situation just happened. For those who don't know, during the Buffalo Bills versus Cincinnati Bengals game, Monday Night Football, first quarter, a defensive back for the Bills made a tackle, seemingly grabbed at his heart, collapsed on the field. They performed CPR on him for 10 minutes. They used an AED to get his heart back going, and they ambulanced him out of there. The only thing we know at this current moment is that he has a pulse now, but he's not breathing on his own. And the game, which is certainly second to what everything else is going on here, is temporarily suspended, is what it's being labeled as. So that's going to be a conversation. And obviously, you listening know the result of everything that's happened at this point. But Jake, initial thoughts of everything going down in Cincinnati tonight, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big context piece is as you listen to this, just keep in mind, like, this literally broke 23 minutes ago. Like, that's when the hit happened. So we don't know what you know. So given off of what we know right now, my initial thoughts were at first, and we kind of talked about it, like, I think if you were a football fan, you thought something like this might happen eventually. And I think it's certainly the scariest thing we've probably ever seen on an NFL field.
It's up there, yeah.
It's up there, and if not the scariest, it's up there. And I think my first thought was, what a weird, like, unsuspecting hit for it to happen. Like, again, as you listen to this, I'm sure it's been analyzed and broken apart, and whatever you've heard, I'm sure it said like what the official like injury was, or you know, like Zach said, it could have been a heart attack for all we know. Because at this point, I think my initial reaction was some very freaky hit thing, like head trauma, or just like you said, it didn't really look like whiplash. But the one thing that I think the NFL has always kind of glossed around is like, it doesn't take a gnarly hit to do really bad damage to the head and neck, and somehow the NFL has never had that happen. So that was my initial thought, was like, they finally got unlucky and one of the little ones like hit the wrong part of the head. But it could have been totally unrelated to the play.
Yeah, and to your point, like we talked about a little bit ahead of time, said it could be a freak brain aneurysm, could be anything like that. There was contact to the head. To your point, it didn't seem like an out of the ordinary play. It seemed like a routine play. It seemed like natural head contact, which, you know, anti-football people will certainly be like, what is natural head contact? There's no such thing. And that's completely fair. I'm just saying it to say, to your point, it wasn't a massive hit. However, again, I'm not a doctor. I don't know fucking anything. I'm a dumbass with a microphone. I know with a lot of injuries, non-head injuries, sometimes the least suspecting looking hits are the ones that hurt the most. Like when you get slammed around and your body goes limp and you look like a noodle, it looks like an insane hit. A lot of times those don't even hurt. But if you get hit solid and it looks like nothing, sometimes you break a rib. Sometimes you puncture a lung. Shit like that happens. So, I mean, certainly possible with the head. Obviously, who knows what he's been dealing with as well.
Correct.
Obviously, we're in the middle of Tua finding out that he's concussed a day after the game because he doesn't remember some of the plays that happened the day before. The worst possible scenario here, again, just from the NFL as a business point of view, and not to sound heartless, but the worst possible situation for them would be news after the fact. Oh, Hamlin was concussed. He was playing concussed. They didn't know what was happening. And then he goes out in the spotlight in a primetime game, Monday Night Football, final Monday Night Football game of the year between two of the AFC's top teams. I would assume one of the most watched games of the year to this point, and then possibly dies live on TV.
Yeah, and to your point, I think we talked about this ahead of time. We want to talk about it live because we think it has merit to react to this live as it's happening. Because I'm sure everyone is processing this stuff, so I think it's good to get it
Yeah.
out so you can process it along with us. But note that we're gonna talk about this, and Zach and I both are just disgusted. And we hope Damar makes it through, like you
Yeah.
said. But with that, yeah, that's worst case for NFL. I also wonder, and we've talked about this not even close to the show, but I wonder if a part of this will be more hardcore checks on player health before the game, not just concussions, which we've talked about, but my initial thought went to I've known a ton of athletes with heart shit they never knew about
Oh,
because
that's
that stuff
constant.
never gets tested because and you can look at I'm not going to be able to name the marquee athlete that I know I've read about before, but there are athletes who have to retire because of heart stuff. And because of that, a lot of these guys don't get it as checked as often as they should because they don't want that news. Like if you have an irregular heartbeat, you're done. You can't
Yeah.
do any of this stuff. And so, and I know that's come out with college stuff. I think I read about it when I was at Kansas State. We had a player go through that. And so that's where my brain goes right away is if it is hard stuff, same thing with the NFL of did they do screenings? What was the checks on heart and that might not be as much of a maltreatment kind of thing. It's just that practice doesn't really exist maybe to the extent that it should,
Mhm.
depending on what happens right now. My other thought is I think football is such an interesting sport because it is the most violent, but I do think the sympathy for injuries and stuff is the highest. My initial reaction to this is it just brings you back to if you've ever played football or things not to this extent, but you've been in this scary moment.
Mhm.
When
Yeah.
everyone's kneeling and you and I don't know about you, but it's you've certainly more so than I have been the guy hit. I even in middle school play have been the guy who hit someone and then they don't get up. And then, it's a stinger or it's whatever, but it's a scary sport, man. And I think what I take out of this is, although this might be, depending on how scary this gets, the scariest thing that's ever happened in the NFL, if you are a true football fan or have played football at any level, unfortunately, it's not that unfamiliar, which I think is kind of wild for this sport.
Yeah, I mean, the scariest sound in football is silence because that's
Yes.
usually, when shit happened, and it's eerie, it's weird, it's not good. Um, yeah, it feels the only way I can describe it, if you're on the field taking a knee, someone down, medical people are out there, it's
Yeah.
silent in the stadium, it feels heavy. Like, it
Yeah.
feels like literally, like, even if you're not the one hurt, it feels like the world is fucking crushing down on you when you're out there. It's like, because it's that moment where your adrenaline is obviously spiking because you're playing, and then all of a sudden
Mhm.
everything stops. It just feels so. It's hard.
I
It's
know.
it's really hard.
I it's so hard and it's also I don't know, it's such a weird feeling because to not make this super morbid, but I just NFL is a weird sport because though no one ever says it out loud, people know that this is a life-altering sport. And so
Yeah.
when you get back up from these hits, I think everyone has to laugh it off. I think the Tua stuff is interesting now in this context because I think going out of this, I think the two are going to get lumped together.
Oh,
And
for
I
sure.
think they probably should. And I think in hindsight, what's interesting is how funny the Tua stuff has been.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
but it almost has to be comical because it's
Yeah.
you almost have to laugh about that stuff in the same way that now that he's made it Alex Smith when he gets brought up is in a comical nature of
Yeah.
the bionic
Yeah.
man, and so it's I think you have to football is a sport that grins and bears it in a really interesting way. And I think now the big question is like, depending on what happens here, and again, we're rooting for Damar in this moment as we record. I wonder, no matter what happens here, if the NFL flinches. Like, what changes?
Yeah. The whole part about joking about things that happen, scary things that happen. Truly, part of it is that reflex that everybody has when you get scared, you laugh afterwards.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
that's a reflex. That's part of it. A part of it is, we're talking about a game that everyone invests so comically. My career is invested in a bunch of people I don't know playing a game. That premise is weird and funny. And when things like
Correct.
that happen, it's like weird. The thing that's different about this for me, and there's a lot of different things because it's the most severe, right? Like that's the scary
Yeah.
part, it's the outlier. This isn't a injury that's part of the game. This isn't
No.
a football injury. From
No.
what we know right now, what this seems, this is a guy's body seemingly failing him in a freak way, in a devastating way. And that's what's sort of crushing here. And there's going to be a lot of
Yeah.
things that come, but
I
yeah,
think so too. I think it seems like it's a freak tragedy. Even if it is somewhat related to the play
right.
doesn't seem like one that like generates this level of trauma. So I think it's gonna be a freak thing. I honestly think though, what I'm interested coming out of this is like we kind of alluded to it earlier, but like, is this the type of sport that can produce that outcome
Right.
even on not its scariest plays? I don't know. Like the football thing always has been. I can't remember what media person said it, but I watched a 30 for 30 documentary along. I think it was Herm Edwards, honestly, and I think Herm's take was, um, if football ever dies out, it will die out at the youth level first,
Mm,
and that's where my
yeah.
brain goes right away on stuff like this. Like, just as like fans and as people, it's hard to watch this, and if you had kids going into football, like it's just one depending on how this goes, like it's one more thing of like maybe ballet's not that bad, This
Right.
usually doesn't happen in polo.
And what's interesting about this specific situation is this, like we said, is a freak thing. This is more common at the youth level.
Bingo. And that's the scary part for me. Like if anyone is seeing this and listening and like the freak nature of it, like you probably already know, but like that's like what I think is like you almost never, because we were even talking about beforehand, like how long it took to like do the emergency procedures and get off the field. And it sounds like, and I hope the rest of the way, emergency personnel do a great job with Damar. It sounds like they have so far.
Mhm.
Um, this is one of the few times I've seen like emergency response on a professional football level. I've seen it smaller handful of times in college football. Saw it many times in high school level.
Yeah.
Just all the time because kids don't know what they're doing.
Mhm.
Um,
Poor
there's
equipment.
honestly less protection. Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Untrained athletes playing an a full contact sport. Yeah, there's so many things. But I want to go back to the thing really quick about does the NFL flinch, because I think that's interesting. And I just want to I just want to ask you this, like, so we know what we know and people
yeah.
listening know what they know. The game currently, like I said, is temporarily suspended. What do you think is now? What do you think the NFL does? What do you think's the right move when something this fucking wild
Yeah.
happens, is polarizing on national TV? Do you think they? Because you can't. I say that I don't know what I mean. Like in my mind is you can't cancel the game. Like you could replay it,
Oh
but
yeah.
when do you replay it with the playoffs starting next week? Like what do you do in this situation?
Yeah, just the logistics of it, which I think is a really interesting conversation to see what they do. Um, I think from the NFL's perspective, and this is I think they can't play it tonight until they know about Damar's stability.
Sure.
Because even on the grossest pragmatic level, and maybe when you're listening, this is what they decided to do. If they decide to play this game tonight and he dies during the game,
Yeah,
it
you can't do that.
can't do it. Can't do it on moral reasons. Can't do it on pragmatic reasons. So they're not going to play tonight. Um,
Mm.
if he is stable and they know his condition tomorrow, maybe they play tomorrow night.
Yeah.
Because I think just for like sake of things in like NFL having to like balance all these other teams, like you said, I think they have to play the game. It was early enough in the game that maybe you can do that. Um, if the worst case scenario happens and he doesn't make it, I don't think you play this game, and I think you have to work it out. In the
Mhm.
record. I just think it would be such a bad because you would have to play it this week, and I think neither one of these teams, just from a moral standpoint, like not to make this funny necessarily, but like just to use a metaphor because I that's how my brain works. If I was working with someone who passed away and my boss was like, "Hey, see you tomorrow," like I'd be like, "Fuck you, bye," like
Yeah.
so. Just from like a friend and a coworker standpoint, like depending on what happens, I don't think this game is getting played unless he's stabilized. And hopefully that's what happens and they play tomorrow and they go. That's my first thoughts anyway.
And literally as you were answering that, as of 45 seconds ago, Ari Mirov tweeted, not even the NFL's account has tweeted this yet, but the game for tonight has been called off.
Yeah. Yeah.
So at this point, who knows what's going on?
Right
But
call. That's the
yeah,
right call for sure. To give the
yeah,
NFL props on that. It's a low bar, but you got to stop tonight. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Now, if this was Vince McMahon's NFL, if, well, how would the NFL have done it? We don't
If if
even.
this was Vince McMahon's NFL, he'd put on a helmet. He'd have
Absolutely.
got out there. Oh my gosh. And then they done a network special on it. But that's
Yeah.
Vince.
Hey.
I think with this, I think what'll be interesting in talking about how the NFL reacts is let's talk about the best outcome.
Hmm.
Let's say, and we're hoping as we listen to this, Damar makes it, recovers, is definitely going to be altered by this, but let's say there was a freak thing, they caught it, he stabilized. What does the NFL change then? Best case scenario, he pulls through. Is that a dodged bullet in the NFL? Just going off of what we know right now, it was a freak thing,
Hmm.
maybe, aggravated by physical exertion, but it's not directly related to the activity of football. Like, what changes?
Honestly, if they're for sure going to do every study possible to
Correct.
derive the conclusion that it was not caused by football. And if
Yeah.
that's the case, we will know that it was not caused by football. That will be the
Yeah.
headlines across everything. So that's that. Like, I just don't know what you can. I'm at a loss of what you can change, to be completely honest. And that goes beyond just this specific instance. Like, I don't know what you can do to make football safer and keep it football, you know?
Correct. And especially like if this goes the way that we are currently understanding it and it wasn't a football related thing, it would surprise me if this was the thing that changed football. Like,
Correct.
honestly, if Ryan Shazier didn't change football, like it's
Mhm.
and this did, I necessarily wouldn't be upset about it because it's certainly the type of event that would provoke change. But it was always wild to me that in a pool didn't change anything. Now, part of that was
Yeah.
looking back, Ryan Shazier himself afterwards was like
Mhm.
advocating for football. Like Ryan Shazier was like,
Mhm.
it's part of the game and had a very positive response. I think the only thing that would change is some of the things we talked about, I think, right before we came on. I just think you have to have not that emergency response didn't do everything they could, but like if this is a high school activity, they've got the ambulance at high school games parked at the corner of the field. you know,
Mhm.
and they're ready to go in these NFL situations, but it's just not. And I know you have those huge stadiums to maneuver, but uh, if he pulls through, and we're hoping he does, like the response time, like if this was like a life or death, we need response right now. Who knows if it would have been fast enough? Like I think it's those things that maybe they change, stuff that like we won't necessarily notice. Maybe more screenings depending on what the cause of it is. I would love to see that, like promote some more physical screenings. And honestly, I think the
Mhm.
biggest change, and let me see if you agree with this, I think this puts, whether it's related or not, I think any changes that we're going to come out of the Tua situation will now have to. I think just any health related incentives will be bolstered by this. Like, okay,
Yeah.
we're really going to emphasize player safety going forward. Whether this was directly tied to it or not, it's like you can't have the look after this of even hinting at a player can play through something. Like no matter what happens with this, that has to be off the table at least for the rest of this season, and hopefully they make long lasting change.
Right. Really quick, do I sound fine because my internet dropped?
Yeah, you dropped out there, but I didn't hear anything different on your audio. You sound good.
Okay. I think a couple things what you said I completely agree with. Like the logistics. Like you need to improve the logistics in terms of just safety procedure, getting the ambulance on, getting the ambulance off, getting the injured person to the facilities that they need to. Um, I don't know. Again, I'm not like on Twitter listening to everybody
Hmm.
right now, but I do think it was a talking point of how long it took. So as
Yeah,
long as yeah, I would assume that's going to continue to be a talking point, and I think that's something that should be figured out better. Um, in terms of players getting checked out more often, and I don't know exactly what every player goes through. I know every player has to do a physical every year, but as anyone who's ever gone for a physical ever, like I think we all know that not every physical is the same.
yeah,
And there's a lot of things that probably aren't checked out. What I would suggest the NFL to do, and probably every professional sport, obviously, and every even college level sport, like the physical testing that players go through during the NFL Combine, in terms of where they check out everything, every little nook and cranny on your fucking body, to find out why the team shouldn't draft you, why the team shouldn't invest in you. That is probably the most detailed medical procedure on the planet, and I'm
yeah,
guessing they only go through that one time. That's
yes.
something where if you can do that every single season, that would be I know most players would probably hate it, but I think that is something that they should implement 100%.
Correct. I think two thoughts. One on the, I'll finish on the point that more connects directly to what you just said, but to start, this isn't as important as the stuff that you just talked about on the other point, but one thing I think that will change is it almost made me think of Kevin Ware when that injury happened in college basketball.
Mhm.
How this was communicated in terms of the visuals has to change. You can't have in terms of the time it took, just him laying on the field for that long like
Mhm.
can't happen. We either have to be able to like transport him, and I know that there's probably worries of moving him. So I even think like maybe something as simple like having a setup where it's like we can't have that on camera, like let's not show it. But even something as simple as like let's get one of these. We've got a million movable tents over here. Like
Yeah, for
j-
sure.
just something like that of like we can't like just have him like laying out there. Even something as simple as like when this has happened in like international soccer games, they've had staff and players like encircle like at a distance to like give them room, but also to like give the player some like privacy like for their own protection. Like those are
Mhm.
little things and not the most important, but it's just like they're just like laying out there for all the world to see, like for their sake and their families. Like that's just got to be the most horrible thing.
Yeah.
So that and then to your point on the like more medical side, this is not going to happen. So I regret to say that before I even give the pitch. But as a baseball fan, part of the reason that baseball has higher levels of medical screenings, like what's happening with Carlos Correa right now, is because of baseball's guaranteed money. They are focused on screenings for longevity. They're like, what is your body going to look like? So they do all of these tests all the time, to your point, because there's more emphasis on long-term player care because they sign them for longer. So at the very least, I think that level of care has to be shown, to your point. But I mean, my pipe dream out of this is that we get at least like longer levels of health insurance for these football players. Like at least that goes past career. Like this is a bare minimum that shouldn't have to be argued for, but it does. Like something like that, something like guaranteed money for a sport with this level of, or at least a higher amount of guaranteed money. Like if the only one who's getting guaranteed paid out there is Deshaun Watson. Like so they need more emphasis on, at the very least, like, yes, take better care of these players, but football is football to an extent. So it just boggles the mind when you think of it, of how is baseball so much better emphasized on long-term care and so much better compensated for what your body goes through than this sport. Like that's always blown my mind. Some would argue that baseball is too compensated, which I totally hear. But when you think about it, it's like football players in terms of longevity, seriously undercompensated.
Yeah, 100%. And just to cap this section of the podcast, just tweeted out again by Ari Mirov. And there's a lot of things getting tweeted, so I'm only going to read the thing I know is credible here. Damar Hamlin currently is in the hospital in critical condition. So again, I mean, scary, unprecedented. It's a lot of shock in the NFL world. And given that news, I just hope this is a situation where the game isn't played. Like I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't have the answers. I just don't think you could play this game tomorrow. And if you can't play the game tomorrow, then I don't think you can play the game. So yeah, I'm not sure.
I'm with you on that. From the bottom of our hearts, best of luck and best wishes to Damar Hamlin and to all of his loved ones, all the players involved. If you're listening to this and you were impacted by that, because that was a pretty triggering thing. Like, like I think people know, a lot of people. I hope you get the support you need, and our thoughts are with you as well. I think on behalf of both Zach and I, we're a pretty silly show. So I think we're probably going to get sillier from here.
Yeah.
So if that's what you need, hang tight. I just don't want to jar you when we start making Jeff Saturday jokes here in a second. Because they're coming. They're coming. So I think we're going to have fun with it, and hopefully it's a relief to whatever you're going to. But if you need support, please get it. And best of luck and best support to everyone involved.